to the second half of Fritjof Capricorn, and I apologize because I know it took forever. This book's really boring, and it was hard to force myself to get through most of it. There's a few chapters towards the second half I didn't get to, but I did skim them, look them over, so we know what they're talking about. And we know what the crux of the book is, of course, in the last few chapters, as well as the first half of the book. And we know what he's going to do, too, because he passes from basically begins the book by talking about two different paradigms, a change in paradigms from, as we said, the old Newtonian paradigm, which was birthed from Cartesian mind-body or mind-physical dualism. And then after the Newtonian period, everything kind of collapsed into a swinging of the pendulum over towards atomism and materialism. Right? All stuff that we know very clear from things I've talked about for many, many years, especially Jay's analysis in the last 5 years. And we can see in the many, many books of Mr. Fritjof that he even at times spills over into the realm of perennialism. And that makes sense because he's trying to integrate ecology, Taoism, and Carl Jung. And this is why I don't think everything that he's saying is wrong, but as I stressed again in the first part, what we're seeing him do in this book is speak of the disintegration of the Western man's worldview after the Middle Ages and theology and Christianity into deism and then naturalistic reductionism and atheism, right, after Marx, Freud, and Darwin, and then being kind of reassembled, being brought back together into its new, supposedly holistic form. So what we want to pay attention to is the fact that what he takes us in the direction of is what he calls, in his theory, a systems view of life, by which he means essentially all systems are webs and networks. You are a node in this vast system of webs and networks in the midst of the world, and the world is essentially made up of a whole bunch of layers and versions of these webs and networks. In other words, economy is just kind of one model of looking at all these different layers and networks and webs. The ecosystem is another layer of looking at that. And the point is that they're all interrelated. Well, of course, we already knew this, right? The medieval Christian worldview, prior to the phase of the destruction in the West, the Orthodox worldview, it already recognized the unity of man's experience and the unity of the universe. The word itself tells us this because it's the world created under God. But in the system that is being reintroduced, and I would argue that you could see Capra as an evangelist of this, is the attempt to, in a kind of a theosophical way, almost reintroduce mysticism into science. So scientism is no longer going to just be some kind of weird in your mom's basement fedora type of Dawkins atheism. It's going to evolve into a kind of theosophy, a kind of religio-mysticism where science is combined with the mysteries of quantum physics. And quantum physics will be the scientific means, supposedly, by which mysticism will reemerge. And what this ultimately means, here's the big key principle, what I've finally figured out, because remember, this is written in 1982, so I've not read his later books, but I did find some recent lectures of Fritjof. And here's the big surprise. Here's the big be-all, end-all of all this project. What's it all about? What is his whole presentation for? Why, it's to tell you that you're a cell in Gaia, and it's proper at times to be recycled. And since mind is a gigantic process, and since mind is life, the world itself is life. And therefore, since Gaia is alive and you're one of the cells in Gaia, sometimes it's necessary for you to just die. right? We have the problem of overpopulation, the crisis that's always present. That's why Fritjof is, of course, a mega proponent of ecology, deep ecology and feminism. And since the mind-body dualism has been overcome, supposedly, now we reintroduce the Mother Earth propaganda. In other words, he says, Gaia is alive, and now what must happen is that the four central areas of life that he's identified, the computational, the biological, the social, and the cognitive, these different layers and networks, and something like, for example, economy, that would be classed under the social networks, right? All these networks are going to merge with, guess what? Tech. So basically we're moving into the realm here of Jacques Attali and the global brain, right? Watch the Minds of Men, transhumanism, and yes, that's the big enchilada. That's the big crowning achievement. The whole thing is to prepare you to jack into the matrix. Because you see, all of these realms are going to link. They're all going to link through Internet of Things, Elon Musk's new DARPA, Tesla brain computer interface that he's rolling out with the brain chips. It's all rolling out now. And so it's all, here's the irony, is that what he kind of gets to, the whole point of all the bringing in the quantum physics, was just to make the point that basically everything is pantheism. God is everything. Everything is in the process philosophy, evolving. And it's coming to its own self-realization. So it's almost Hegelian here. We could see this almost like Hegel, who said that all of history was more or less a process of divided states coming into self-consciousness. So even matter itself will come to evolve to be self-conscious in Hegel. Enter then the Eastern mysticism in the next chapter, that where I left off before, the new physics chapter. So the ideological underpinning and basis for how this is all possible and going to be is quantum physics, which is the reintroduction of mysticism, uncertainty, holism into physics. We can no longer hold to reductionistic materialism because everything essentially exists in webs of networks, and one node in the web is not more primary or more central or more basic than the other nodes in the web. Now, I would agree with this, right? I think that there's good arguments to be made, but I think this was always true. This was always true back when St. Maximus was arguing on the basis of orthodox metaphysics that this was true. You can read Christos Yanaris' book, Person and Eros, where you will find very deep statements about the same type of stuff, which is interesting because as this chapter progresses, he moves through talking about various theorists back then about the quantum status of things, that basically there's not matter in the sense that we think of it, because as you go down further and further to the more subatomic levels of things, you're realizing that it's not like little building blocks of pieces of things. It's actually just energy. It's energy in different states and forms. So that's not to say that there's no such thing as solidity, or that matter doesn't exist, but rather that matter is just a word that we've given to energy in a certain form. I think that's true. I don't think there's any problem with that. I don't think that disagrees with any idea of creation or whatever. I don't think it doesn't prove that we live in a giant fake simulation. You could point out holographic or holography, and how holography works in terms of like field theory and unified fields and things being in a very the macro scale is reflected in the micro scale. That sounds like St. Maximus. I don't see any problem with that. But the problem is that if we try to move this into a new agey thing where we say, oh, well, then that must mean that this world's not real and the events that happen to us are not real, and it's all illusion, Maya. No. Saying that matter is energy in different states of being, or different forms or whatever, different configurations, in no way entails that our experiences are fake, false, or not real, or that we don't possess a body or some sort of Gnostic type of thing. We wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that, at least not in the Orthodox metaphysic. But as we saw earlier, for Capra, he has a stated intention to reintroduce either or dialectics, and then to try to transcend either or dialectics with the mother goddess. I'm not joking. So whereas in Orthodox theology we talk about transcending dialectics and either or and the one and the many with our belief in our doctrine of God, both in his personhood of Father, Son, and Spirit, and in the distinction between the essence and energies in God. For Capricorn, for Fritjof, what this means is instead, we need to transcend this by saying that all things are one and all things are manifestations of the Mother Goddess in a pantheistic sense. So he has not solved the dilemma that he intentionally sought to overcome. Many dialectics, in fact, which he is seeking to overcome dialectics, which is interesting. But the attempt to overcome these dialectics, both in the sense of the one and the many, and in the sense of being and becoming, which is a dialectical tension, he seeks to overcome them in stating that everything is one. Well, that doesn't overcome anything. That makes these things illusory. It is interesting that he speaks of the dance of energy and the dance of nature. And we would agree with that. And in fact, Maximus speaks this way as well. And then he talks about S-matrix theory, which is a kind of topological interpretation from David Bohm. And it's also sounds fascinatingly similar in many ways to St. Maximus. But regardless, to make a long story short, that was just an attempt, a theory to try to unify these different fields. So he goes on to say that the reductionistic models don't work. He actually goes back to some interesting points in Paracelsus, and he says that Paracelsus gave rise to Descartes. We knew that because of the alchemical stuff. And he even mentions some of the alchemical stuff. And then he mentions the progress from Descartes and Newton into Darwin, Lamarck, Lyell, Malthus, right? Malthusianism, genetic determinism, sort of the logical process moving from Linus Pauling to Watson and Crick and DNA, to basically saying that everything in these different fields, they're constantly trying to find the one God particle, you could say, the one final little piece of stuff that everything is made up of. And why would they even be on that project? Well, they're on that project to find the basic building block of all reality in quanta, in matter, because they are idiotic materialists, because they assume from the outset that the only thing that exists is matter. Why? Because matter is all that can be proven scientifically, supposedly, empirically. This is such a childish, foolish assumption that, again, it is very, very easy to refute this assumption. Now, the book then moves out of the field of tracing the history of science into the field of the new models. Now, this is fascinating because he kind of admits that science and the movement of science, pop science, big science, over the last many decades, 40, 50 years, is a kind of propaganda. Whoa, shocker there, right? He correctly talks about Western medicine kind of being grounded around ideological trends that come from big foundations and institutions. He mentions the Rockefeller Foundation. He mentions the Johnson Foundation, some Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, UC Berkeley. He gives a list of these statements from these foundations that have talked about why Western medicine is superior because of its precision and kind of like drilling down to the microscopic and then beyond the microscopic level, so trying to figure things out. And so the entire social and cultural transformation, he says, is what will bring about the change. And one of the key ways, this is what a lot of people don't understand, that this will happen is through medicine. So this brings to mind AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire, the Nancy Turner Banks book, because he's essentially saying that, look, science is more than just studying things in a lab and a test tube. Science is a big part of social engineering, and the entire social and cultural transformation will occur through science changing mindsets in one crucial area. Now, it's going to change mindsets in many areas, as we know now. People like Neil deGrasse Tyson and these sort of propagandists, Dawkins, etc., Bill Nye, Sam Harris. It's also going to be central to change medicine. Medicine, right? Rockefeller medicine. This is key. The entire social and cultural transformation is key. Now, he gives some examples of things that are true. He says that we poison our food and we have high rates of cancer, which are, he's identifying correct problems, isn't he? Yes, you see. Many of the green people will identify legitimate, correct problems. So we can't associate all of his ideas with, oh, well, if you believe that, then you're like a boomer, right? A boomer would look at this, oh, well, this guy's saying this because he's a green commie and he thinks that we don't have the best medicine in the West and we don't have the best diet. We don't have the best diet. Since the 1970s, we've been told to eat Kellogg's cornflakes. So he correctly identifies the poisoning of the American populace in the diet. Of course, he doesn't mention that this is part of the Malthusianism, which he affirms. Now, then he moves from the need to change the biomedical field into an organ of propaganda, into accepting holistic practices, which is interesting. He says now it's time to change psychology, because you see, psychology went down the same path as Newton and Newtonianism and atomism, and psychology requires its own revolution. And so he points to Carl Jung. Now, there are some insights in Carl Jung. Carl Jung, of course, is just a Gnostic. He's representing Gnosticism. And I do think he has some interesting analysis of, archetypes and symbols and things like that. But Fritjof is appropriating Carl Jung to reintroduce mystical experiences and Gnosticism into psychotherapy, therapy, and our view of the psyche. And that is dangerous. Again, not because Carl Jung isn't insightful, but because Carl Jung isn't a reliable guide for integrating your shadow self. You don't integrate and appropriate evil, right? Carl Jung denies the existence of spiritual good and evil. He says that they're basically manifestations of the psyche. They come out of you. So you might have a evil, wicked, rapey side, but it's just time to own that, dude. It's just time to own that. No, we don't own that. We have to not give in to our wicked side. So we can't accept Carl Jung. Carl Jung also taught in his essay on Antichrist that Jesus and Antichrist are flip sides of the same coin. So Carl Jung, in the final analysis, is a Gnostic, Luciferian, quite literally Luciferian type of character, right? Now, if Carl Jung comes to the table and like Fritjof says, look, too much of science has been wrapped up in materialism and the presuppositions of materialism, and we need to get beyond materialism. That's true, and that's true not because Carl Jung says it, but because the argument is true, right? And so in the same way, if something is true in Carl Jung or Fritjof, we can appreciate it without adopting the whole systematic approach of Gnostic Luciferianism. And this chapter is interesting because at the end of this chapter on economics, which is this next section, he moves through the Newtonian models of economics, something that I've talked about. I've written essays on economic nominalism as the end result of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Jefferson, Locke, these sort of laissez-faire characters. And then it does logically follow that the end result of this, he argues, is the sort of Puritan, what Max Weber argues is the American Puritan work ethic, which I think is correct. I've read Max Weber's book, and I've also read a huge portion of the Puritans and the Calvinists, and they do have that mindset. And so he does have some interesting critiques of that mindset, which, for example, any person from the Middle Ages would agree with, right? We wouldn't want to, for example, set our work over against leisure as if the whole time that we do our work, we are just trying to get to a period of leisure. No, work should be viewed as something dignifying, something related to legitimate skill, this kind of stuff. All these critiques that Fritjof has of kind of modern consumerism and industrialism, I would say they're legitimate criticisms. I mean, could you imagine living in New York and spending your entire day working at Amazon and then coming home to, just endless video games and screens all night? Well, no wonder people are miserable. And so from that vantage point, yes, we could see, which is ironic because that's the end goal of where Fritjof is trying to take everybody. He's trying to set it up like, there's going to be this kind of smart city paradise where you're going to live in the, Jacques Fresco plastic AI city, in the perfect United Nations world, and it's all going to be perfect because everything's integrated into your brain. And no, actually, the real world is, sci-fi dystopia, The Matrix, or the movie The Congress with Robin, what's her face? From Prince Bride, Robin. Anyway, so according to Capra, the new age that's coming will integrate deep ecology, ecological feminism, with economics. Economics will become ecology. Everything that's fractured will be reintegrated into a new whole. How will this be possible? Through the web, dude. The web. The internet, you see. And literally kind of almost sounds like theosophy here. He says that a new science will emerge, a new global ecology economics, where everything will be reintegrated and it'll be super mystic, dude. Yeah. It'll be theosophy leading to the Matrix. You want the whole kit and caboodle this book. In short, it's theosophy equals the dystopian Matrix, even though Fritjof is telling you that it will be the utopia. Austerity, limits to growth is the next chapter, and he talks about economics as kind of a meta science, and that you can't have this masculine principle, so-called, or supposedly, of continual and ever-present growth. This is interesting because growth has to, at some point, he says, cease because death is natural. So here is the end result of all the philosophical systems that don't believe in creation, they don't believe in the fall. They will apotheosize death. Death becomes just as real, just as necessary, and just as, quote, natural as life itself. Again, listen to the interview that I did with Tim Kelly on Luciferianism and H.G. Wells and Darwin, because I talk about how they apotheosize death, and that it's literally impossible to have a coherent worldview without the doctrine of creation and the fall. Because if you don't have that, you're going to deify death. And essentially he does this. He goes on to talk about the Green Revolution, and he ends this economy section by saying the new physics will not just unify and holistically bring ecology together. Guess what the new physics is going to do? It's going to unify all cultures. Now, next he moves into justifying how this is possible on the basis of his systems view of life, which he got from, guess who? Arthur Koestler, Ghost in the Machine. Exactly. That's why I told you that Ghost in the Machine was a very important overlooked book to the global elite. He talks about the holons that we covered in the Ghost in the Machine talk, which you've not heard. If you've not heard that, go listen to that. Again, the two talks that are the most similar to this, well, actually Attali too, because that's where Fritjof is taking us. Right, so you want to listen to Jacques Attali talk that we did, Brief History of the Future, you want to listen to Ghost in the Machine, Kessler Talk that we did, and you want to listen to the Marilyn Ferguson Aquarian Age, where she goes into all the nodes and the networks and how all networks and nodes, including you, will be linked together. And so Fritjof goes on to say this is just natural because this is what you see in the natural world. If you look at plant systems, there are a bunch of interlinked connecting systems with nodes, and they all match up and necessitate one another. And then he goes again to wholeness and health. And once again, this is very fascinating because he starts to reveal a little more about where he gets his ideas. Oh, guess what? Shamanism, page 306, is very important. We need to recover the powers and intuitions of the many shamanic traditions. The mystic traditions, the shamanic traditions, the snake god. He literally says we need to look at the snake god, Asclepius, page 310, the Hippocratic Oath. There's something to the mysticism here behind the alchemy behind these different religious images. And maybe the snake god, i.e. Lucifer, can help us out. Now, that's a fascinating section because, again, we're getting more and more of a picture into the fact that it's almost like he's wanting us to go down a path of initiation. In fact, he uses this language. The book moves into talking about the Jungian conceptions of moving past space and time, moving past Freud. And so he's kind of laying out that, well, Freud was kind of this figure obsessed with the sexuality, obsessed with the primal and the material. And he says, so we can kind of move past Freud into the Carl Jung phase where we have the integration of spirit once again into matter, the integration of these supposed opposites, black, white, evil, good, day, night, male, female, back into a new holistic union. So let's go in the direction of Carl Jung, he says, and let's mix a little bit of Carl Jung with Alfred North Whitehead, which is process philosophy. And then a very fascinating section where he once again goes to CIA MK Ultra Dr. Gregory Bateson and says Bateson told us much about schizophrenia and that the mystics who underwent initiation ceremonies, the shamans and the mystics of the varied religious traditions of the world, he says that they're just like the schizos, and it's just like what you see in MK Ultra and LSD. So maybe he says it's time to bring back the psychedelic models to reinitiate the culture. Burning Man, CIA counterculture, 1960s, MK Ultra. And who does he go to? Gregory Bateson. Exactly. He says alternative technology will bring this in. Alternative technology will be a key way to alter and change the culture, right? Things like solar energy, going green, smart cities, this kind of stuff. He's essentially saying that a lot of that is the equivalent to social engineering. And then it's on page 415, 416, where he literally says that in the big scale picture, the way to overcome the perpetual dialectics of the one and the many that we see throughout history, throughout cultures that I talk about quite often, he says the way to overcome this is through the reintroduction of pantheism and the goddess. And who does he cite? John Lennon. John Lennon, mate. Imagine there's no heaven, no hell below us, above us on the sky. Imagine all the people tripping with Terence McKenna. And how does the book conclude? You can't make this up. We're into Dave McGowan territory where he says the 60s counterculture, the CIA hippie 60s counterculture is the future. And Gregory Bateson was right. You can't make this up. That's how he concludes the book. Now, when you go and you listen to the more recent talks and interviews and lectures, I went through several of them, of Mr. Fritjof, he tells us a little more clearly, especially given the rise of the internet, right? So this is 82, and it's one of those books that was kind of predicting where things would go. The systems view of life, the webs and networks, you're just a cell in Gaia to be recycled. Everything is mental. Literally, the whole world is mental in the sense of an ongoing mental process. And you're just a node, a cell on the surface of Mother Earth, Gaia. You're one of Gaia's cells. And you might need to be recycled and scrubbed off of Mother Earth's bunions. You're the scrofulous off scouring of Mother Earth's bunion. Unless, of course, you're part of the elite initiated priest class like Bertrand Russell or Fritjof Capricorn. That's the point of this whole book. Again, let's take our checklist of the central points of the globalism book series that they all hold to, and do we see Fritjof departing from any of them? Let's see, does Fritjof depart from Darwinism? No. Does he depart from overpopulation? No. Does Fritjof say that we need a global government? Yes. Does Fritjof say that we need a global economy? Yes. Does Fritjof say that we need a global technocratic control structure? More or less, yes. In fact, in the more recent lectures that you find on YouTube of Fritjof, he's more or less saying that the global brain is here and it's time for you to get jacked in. Because that's the system's view of life, and you're all just nodes and webs in a giant network. It's going to be a giant global AI brain. So jack into it, quite literally. A crazy timing, because I figured that's where Fritjof would go, but because obviously they're all kind of saying the same thing. But I didn't realize that the more recent Fritjof lectures that I checked out on YouTube, he's quite literally saying what Elon Musk just said this week. Time to roll it out. The brain chips are here. Let's jack into the matrix. So that's what all this was to prepare you for. Now, how initiated is Fritjof? I would say he's a little more initiated than some of these people, because he does seem to understand the bigger picture. And I think the most striking thing about this very boring book was how many times I caught Fritjof saying things that I had said, but then trying to twist it into how that leads us to global government and the need for global government. And the other thing I think that was so surprising, so striking in this book, was the many admissions of the CIA's 60s counterculture, particularly the figure of Gregory Bateson, how that was preparing us for where we are now. In other words, we've proposed this thesis many times on the basis of, what Dave McGowan says about Laurel Canyon and the 60s and the counterculture and all that, and the New Age, blah, blah, blah. But here we have a globalist thinker basically confirming that and saying that, yes, the 60s, Gregory Bateson, CIA, psychedelics, Carl Jung, basically the kind of thing that you find in Tim Leary's book about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He says that is all true. It's all for the purpose of socially engineering you into the new aeon of the global brain. So there you go. So what is the turning point? The turning point is this period of the introduction of quantum physics, the 1960s, the systems view of life, the holistic stuff, and ultimately transhumanism. I don't think he doesn't use the term transhumanism in this book, but it doesn't matter because that's what he's talking about. And again, the other key point that a lot of books leave out is that he stresses that a lot of this is going to come in through medicine. That was a key point in this book. Teilhard de Chardin comes up again. The noosphere. We've talked about Teilhard many times. But just to make sure, I don't think. I mean, he's essentially arguing that transhumanism is the result, even though he doesn't use the term transhumanism, because he's more so interested in talking about the social, cultural, medical changes that are coming as a result of the turning point. So there you go. Theosophy essentially is where we are going, and that's why, again, as you see people connected to Fritjof here, people that he's written with, Jacob Needleman, who is the editor of the Sort of Gnosis book, which is the actually that book is worth reading because of the critique of Darwinism in that book from Titus Bruckhardt. That doesn't mean I'm recommending everything from Fritjof or Needleman. But I've not read these other Fritjof books. But we see where he's going here, right? Deep ecology, Luciferian New World Order type stuff. But don't make the mistake of falling into the dialectics of thinking that not every criticism that Fritjof has of the Newtonian, Darwinian, mechanistic, materialist model is false, right? The critiques, many of them are accurate. Many of them are the same that I've given. The solutions is where the falsehood comes in. So there you go. That's the essence of this very long and boring book. I hope that you appreciate. I forced myself to do as much as I could. I got probably 75% of it done. But it's just becoming too much of a drag. And that's the essence of the book. So we're going to move on. There's other more important things than this guy. So we want to get into, I think, probably some theology next. But we see that it, once again, it integrates very well with the rest of the Globalism book series, all the same stuff. The only differences tend to be in the specifics, the minutiae. The overall plan is the same. It's all going in the same direction. So there you go. That's the turning point. Hopefully we don't have to return to Fritjof. I have to say, of the whole Globalism book series, this and John C. Lilly's have been the most boring and the worst to read. So there you go. God bless you guys, and we will return very soon to deal with some theology, and then I did say we were going to do more Julian Huxley. But actually, the rest of the book on Living in a Revolution is really just rehashed, and Melissa Melton noticed this too. With Julian, he just kind of rehashes himself. He literally just rewrites the same essay about Darwinian propaganda, pretty much every chapter. He just rewords it a little bit. It's like over and over and over. He just says the same thing. So I don't know. We'll see where we take things next in the Globalism book series. I'm not sure yet where we're going to go, but thank you guys, and look forward next week to some theology.